Hi, everyone in the US and Israel and Palestine and other places in the world. This is the latest in Partners for Progressive Israel's webinar series, Conversations with Israel and Palestine. Today's webinar with two representatives of Breaking the Silence is called Not Just Gaza, an update on the deteriorating reality in the West Bank. My name is Ron Skolnick. I organize these webinars on behalf of Partners for Progressive Israel. In a moment, I'm going to hand things over to today's discussion moderator, Partners Executive Director, Rabbi Margot Youth Robinson. Before I do so, just a few notes. One, Partners for Progressive Israel is an American not-for-profit that is dedicated to the achievement of a durable and just peace between Israel and its neighbors, and that includes, of course, an end to Israel's occupation based on the two-state solution. Partners supports Israelis working to ensure social justice, civil rights, Jewish-Arab partnership, and equality for all of Israel's inhabitants. The organization seeks to deepen Americans' understanding of the complexities of Israel and Palestine so that they can better advocate for a progressive future for all the inhabitants of the region. Partners is glad to be bringing this webinar to you all for free. If you appreciate today's event, like it, might want more programming like it, please spread the word. And also, if you can, please visit progressiveisrael.org and make a contribution. Before we get going on a very sad note, I want to share condolences on behalf of Partners for Progressive Israel over the loss of the 6 hostages whose bodies were retrieved from Gaza yesterday. In particular, condolences go out to Abraham Munder's nephew, Zahiro Shachamor, who was on a Partners webinar with us in late June, and to Alex Danzig's children, Sharon and Mati, who spoke at the organization's Israel-Palestine symposium during the spring. Yehi Zichram Baruch. Now I'm hard to switch gears, but I need to do so. Quick note about upcoming programming. The next webinar we're working on right now for after Labor Day is going to be a webinar with leaders of the new party in Israel called Democratim, which is basically a merger or unification of labor and merits, and that should happen sometime in the first half of September. Just one note before I introduce the panel about the chat and the Q&A. The Q&A is where folks are encouraged to ask questions, and you don't have to wait. You can start putting your questions there already if you so choose. The chat is open for conversation amongst the audience. It is not the place for questions. It's not going to be monitored for questions. So if you want your question looked at, and hopefully we get to them all, that should be via the Q&A function. Let me now introduce our panel in brief. Luiz Aberbuch was born in Brazil. He is a Boger, an alumnus of Habunim Dror youth movement in Brazil, and immigrated to Israel in 2014. After that, he enlisted in the IDF, served in the Nachshon Regiment, Kfir Brigade, from 2014 to 16. He spent most of his service in the West Bank, Gaza, at the Gaza and Lebanon borders. Luiz is currently studying political science at Bar Ilan University, and has also worked as educational coordinator for Israel South programming. Luiz serves as Breaking the Silence's Jewish Diaspora Educational Coordinator. Along with Luiz is Amir Ziv. We were supposed to have Tal Sagi on today. Tal is ill, and so Amir has stepped in to take Tal's place. Amir Ziv grew up in Jerusalem and joined the Hashomer Zair youth movement as a kid. In high school, he was a counselor in Hashomer Zair. He enlisted in the IDF at age 19 and served from 2008 to 11 in the Nachal Brigade's 50th Battalion as a combatant and a commander. And in his time in the military, he served at the border fence between Gaza Strip and Israel. He spent 6 months in Hebron, and he deployed to different places in the West Bank. Following that service, he served as an educator in a boarding school. He holds a Bachelor of Education from the Kibbutzim College of Education, and he has been an activist with Breaking the Silence, Shobrim Shtika, since 2013, and began the role of the pedagogic coordinator there in 2020. Rabbi Margot Hughes Robinson, as I mentioned, our moderator today, is the executive director of Partners for Progressive Israel, ordained by the Jewish Theological Seminary in 2001. Rabbi Hughes Robinson also holds an MA in Midrash, as well as an advanced certificate in interreligious studies from the Ecumenical Institute at Bassi and the University of Geneva. So with that, I will hand things over to Rabbi Margot Hughes Robinson. Wish you all an informative and enriching webinar.
Thanks so much, Ron. And thank you again, Louise and Amir, for being with us. As we all know, our focus primarily today is on the West Bank, but I imagine folks will also have questions about what is happening in Gaza, elsewhere, the northern border. So please, I encourage people to put their comments and questions as they arise in the chat. Thank you both again so much for the work that you're both doing individually and the broader work that Breaking the Silence, Shofrim Shtika, is doing right now. It's so essential, and we're honored to have you with us. So I think we're going to go ahead and get started. And I'm wondering if the two of you can help us to get sort of a broader picture of the situation in the West Bank immediately prior to October of this year and now. Because I imagine a number of folks present with us might be aware of what's happening in really broad strokes, the sealing of the West Bank for Palestinians, but not for Israeli settlers, Jewish Israeli settlers, increasing land seizure and theft. But if you could paint sort of a more in-depth picture of just what's been happening in the last year plus, we'd really appreciate it.
So, hello everyone. Thank you for coming, and again, once again, thank you for the invitation. First of all, it's very important to stress that it's insane that almost a year passed. Here in Israel, we are talking about the 1 year anniversary of the October 7, how it will be. Seeing a lot of debate and conflict around how it will look, and it's really insane that this is the reality that we are still in, and that's the first thing that we must point out, mainly after the events of the 6 hostages in the last few days, and stress the importance of talk about it and really arrives to solutions to end this war. So even before the October 7, during 2023, we have saw the debate around judicial overhaul and all the complexity that we had in this debate with this settler government, right? With Canist representatives in the power, trying to somehow get fully in control of the West Bank through this project of judicial overhaul, and the Israeli society was deeply inside of this debate. And then October 7 happened, and this debate kind of disappeared. We entered in the situation of conflict, and this was put aside, right? And all the focus was put in Gaza and in the war and everything that was happening in the war, and why we need to protect us, of course, protect the civilians, and why this war is justified, and why we must go to keep doing that until the then it's a Hona Mukhlat, right? And the absolute victory against the Hamas. And it was since then we have seen an exponential growing in violence in general, and of course that in West Bank, when all the world have its eyes on Gaza Strip and all the destruction and the huge amount of victims that are being inflicted in this war. But then suddenly we saw in the West Bank, like, of course, this violence also grew exponentially. And slowly, we have seen through this last month also how this government is quietly and in the fact of like making his moves to guarantee the full control of the area, and and the situation it's really violent, absolutely without control, and a lot of impunity, mainly for Israeli settlers, violent Israeli settlers in the West Bank. And of course, in general, here in Israel, the discourse of the society and the discourse and the communications in media and in general, it became a very violent and aggressive narrative of revenge, right? And how this was the idea of, we heard a lot about people saying that it's pakachnu, like we open our eyes, we understood that we don't have anyone to talk to about a peace process or any kind of debate in a sense, and then the wars must keep going, right? And we see also the government influencing and pushing this kind of narrative. And I think that Amir can add more in the specifics of such specific events that happen, very violent events, including communities being expelled, settler violence, like I mentioned, absolutely not under control. Yes.
Yeah, please, Amir, anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, first, thanks, as Lou said, thanks for having us, and thank you for being here and listening and talking about the situation. Um, and 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 I will say that it is a very weird situation to be in. 10 months into the war, not feeling as if anything is gonna change, and the fact that 10 months into after October 7th, there are still 109 Israelis held captive, and it feels as if that's not the main thing on our government's agenda, which is something that's very hard to comprehend. Um, and alongside that, the endless bombardment and death we see in Gaza, and a lot of refugees, and horrifying pictures of what we're actually doing in the Gaza Strip since October 7th. Um, and I will say that before October 7th, as Louis said, the judicial overhaul is something that most Israelis had their eyes on, but the past year before that was one of the most violent years in the West Bank since the Second Intifada. A lot of Palestinians lost their lives during that past year. We saw violent attacks by settlers in places like Hawara or Fakara before that, and a lot of settler violence before October 7th. And obviously, as Louis said, not many people paid the price. Not many people were arrested, if any. The state of Israel doesn't really want to uphold the laws on violent settlers, even though they're not doing a very good job hiding themselves. They're doing it plain view and plain sight because they know they won't have any legal repercussion to whatever they're doing in the West Bank. But I will say that one of the things that gotten a lot worse since October 7th is the fact that just after the Hamas attack on October 7th, the IDF took all of his mandatory service soldiers to fight in Gaza and enlisted a lot of reservists. And a lot of those reservists who served in the West Bank in the past few months are settlers themselves. So in the last few months, there aren't violent settlers and soldiers who are standing next to them doing nothing. The violent settlers are the soldiers acting on the ground, and they gotten a lot more power, a lot more authority, and they're doing their attacks. They keep on harassing Palestinians, but as of now, they're doing it as part of the IDF, as part of Israel's policies. They are the state of Israel's messengers, or I don't know if messenger is the right word, but apostles, right? They are carrying the IDF, the Israeli policy in the West Bank as IDF soldiers. And that gotten a lot of Palestinians hurt. We have 5,200 Palestinians who were injured in the past 10 months in the West Bank, 588 Palestinians died in the past 10 months in the West Bank. And we see a lot of displacement. 18 Palestinian villages and communities were displaced. They left their villages completely because of settler violence or soldier violence, which, again, for the past 10 months are the same people. So the year before, 2023, was a very tough year in the West Bank, and it gotten worse since.
Yeah, and I must just a little mention is that, as Amir said, we have seen this exponential growth in violence and impunity, and so settlers being soldiers, and it's very urgent to stop it, right? But the issue is not that before that, as Amir mentioned, also 2020 was one of the most violent years, but in general, the reality on the territories is violence. That's the language that the Arab speaks on the territories, and also the settlers, right? And I can say that when I arrived in Israel and I started my service in the Nachshon Brigade, it was already very clear who gave the cards to the game, right? Even if it was by living together with settlers, having literally a military outpost inside a settler's home, or the influence of settler security chiefs, which are civilians, right? But influencing decisions and orders from my commanders, right? Impunity by when we have settler violence. I was put to during my service. I was put to protect Palestinians during the Masik, during the olives. Why? To protect them for settler violence. And when I arrived in Israel, I wouldn't understand everything. Like, I was from the Abonim Durar youth movement, and we talked a lot about the occupation. And I was one of these very old school and classic and radical, I would say, Zionist socialists, right? And we talked about the occupation a lot. And well, of course, that we are like, we must peace, somehow we must peace, but it's so hard, right? The mentality is that if the Arabs, they weren't so violent, maybe we wouldn't do that, right? But being there, you slowly start to really understand the logic. And the logic is full control on Palestinians, protect the Israeli settlers, right? And we want full control of how much more land we can with less Palestinians, right? And what we are seeing since October 7 is everything that we had before, but on steroids, right?
I appreciate you both illuminating some of this. If I can just reflect back what I'm hearing, what we're seeing in the West Bank is sort of a massive increase of all of these elements that were already there. A culture that is just violent in and of itself, both structurally and interpersonally, with like violent attacks, but also a violent system of dispossession, of pushing Palestinians out of their lands. This now meshing of the IDF and the settler, either private security or even these people being one and the same through the reserve drafting after October 7th, and this notion of impunity, right? That settlers are doing whatever they want, often very, very violent things without any meaningful consequences. One of my initial questions as an American citizen is about the sanctions that's been placed by the US government, by Canada, also even more recently, on both individual settlers and organizations. Has that made any impact on the ground, these economic sanctions that are coming from sort of externally from foreign governments?
I will say that it's very early on, so we cannot know what will happen in the next few months. So I don't know in the upcoming months, but I will say that it feels as if the sanctions made an effect on the people in power, right? A lot of private individuals got sanctions from the US on February, and then, as you said, a lot of other countries as well, Canada, the UK, and Spain, France, and so on, Japan, I think, but a lot of sanctions on individuals, and it gotten a lot of attention from Israeli politicians. They started talking about it. They went to the outposts or the settlements where those individuals lives and created, I don't know, tweeted and Facebook posts and videos of trying to explain why these uh, uh, sanctions, as they call it, anti-Semitic sanctions and not political in any way or form. And one of those politicians in Israel, Tzvi Sukkot, actually said that he explains the sanctions as anti-Semitic by saying that the person who got sanctioned doesn't even have a criminal record. That shows that the United States government just picked somebody in random because he's an Israeli or a Jew in the settlements and declared him under sanctions. But the fact is that the reason we need those international sanctions is the fact that those people does not have criminal records. Is the fact that the state of Israel doesn't do its job and doesn't uphold the law on criminals, basically, right? And it's not that the state of Israel does not know how to, or doesn't have the resources, or doesn't have the knowledge to uphold the law on Israeli citizens, because obviously the state of Israel does that. The state of Israel does not uphold the law on violent settlers because we don't want to. Because violent settlers are part, as Louis said, part of the system itself. It's part of the idea behind controlling the Palestinian territories, right? We want the Palestinians, when I was in the IDF, we called it, we want the Palestinians, שישאירו את הראש למטה, keep their heads down. We wanted them to feel as if it's irrelevant to resist, who are full control. And settler violence is one aspect of that control. And those sanctions are important in our point of view. And it's a starting point. They're not enough on their own. And I think sanctions on organizations and movements are much more important than on individual people. The fact that a Mana organization is sanctioned now is one of the most important acts that the United States have done in, I don't know, since the occupation began.
And just to add to Amir, that at this moment that the US, with all the elections and pivotal point in the political scene, it may be, we have seen the tensions around the subject and connected with the election in the US. That's, as Amir mentioned, movements and organizations, it's very important that the Jewish community start to really ask the hard questions and talk about what is going on, which Israel we really want, and what each Israel is it really becoming? What is happening on the ground? And of course, that I'm sure that the Jewish community in the West very worried with everything that happens here and have put Israel in a very important place in their lives, and they really love Israel. But we cannot be blind, right? And I think that in the West and all over the world, in contrast with Israel, people are really seeing what's going on in Gaza. People are seeing what's going on in the West Bank. People are seeing the violence. People are seeing the impunity. People are seeing the control that we exert on the Palestinians. But in Israel, we don't have this debate. We see everything by the soldier perspective, right? So, and even when this kind of the hard questions and what's really going in the ground, they appears like it's anti-Semitic, it's false, it's fake. They're doing that to fulfill their purpose. And so in this case, also by being a Jewish from diaspora, I think that the Jewish community here have a very important role to play.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I would say that's also the mission of partners in some ways, right? Is to mobilize um the American Jewish community at least, and the wider American community around precisely these human rights issues within Israel and Palestine. And both of you raised already the involvement and sort of complicity of Israeli politicians in what's happening in the West Bank, that there is if anything, a heightened awareness, right, of what's happening over the Green Line by the people who are in power within the state's recognized borders. Tzvi Sukkot, also, I think people may be familiar with his name on this call, also because he was involved in the break-in at Sdei Taman military base a few weeks ago. But we talked about sort of in preparation for this conversation that there's been very distressing developments, not only within the West Bank itself, but on the part of Israeli state policy more broadly towards the occupation of the West Bank, particularly Finance Minister Smotrich transferring administration from the West Bank from a military team to a civilian oversight system. Can you guys explain a little bit more about what this means, both in terms of policy and in terms of daily life in the West Bank? And I see also we have a question in the chat sort of bringing up a third aspect. How permanent or how sticky are these actions in terms of long-term Israeli policy? Is this something that you think will fade with an eventual end of a Netanyahu administration, or is this a turning point really in the perspective of the Israeli state in your perspective?
All right, there's a lot to unpack there, and
Yeah,
I
sorry,
will
that was three
say,
in one questions. We can go
yeah,
slowly.
I will say about Smotrich's um, I don't know, recent changes, let's call it as simply as possible, about the control over the West Bank, and I will say that it is a very important subject, even though it's one of the most boring subjects that ever existed, because we're talking about bureaucracy. We're talking about which person is in charge of which document and which file needs to go where, and that is boring, but it is crucial. Because when we talk about the Israeli occupation in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, we're talking about military regime, temporary military regime since 1967 in those territories. That's the definition of the situation. And as long as the state of Israel doesn't annex the Palestinian territory, the definition of occupation has to be temporary. It should come to an end at some point. And since the 80s, I'm not getting into much details because it is complicated and it will take forever to explain. But since the 80s, there's an IDF unit called the Civil Administration, which acts as the de facto government of the West Bank. It's an IDF unit, soldiers serve there. We have team members who served in the civil administration, and they are in charge of controlling the day-to-day life in the West Bank, both for settlers and Palestinians, right? And basically what Bezalel Smotrich did in the past year and a half was to cut off a chunk of the civil administration's responsibilities in the West Bank regarding infrastructure and housing units and education systems and electricity grids and whatever it is, everything that's under the civil responsibility of the civil administration, nothing regarding security threats. And he took those issues and carved them out from the civil administration and created a new agency, which he calls Minhelet HaYeshvut, the settlement agency. I guess that's as good as a translation I can give. Uh, Basically, what that means is that there is now an Israeli citizen who is put to place by Bezalel Smotrich, who is in charge of the civil issues and infrastructures of the West Bank, which basically means that without saying that, Israel has annexed the West Bank. Israel is starting the state of Israel. The Israeli government is in charge of infrastructure and municipality issues in the West Bank today. And that is a de jure annexation. That is a huge step, right? Because if that will remain permanent, that will make Israel an apartheid state by definition, because the West Bank will no longer be under military occupation, but under the direct control of the Israeli government, and will have two different uh, um, groups of people under the same government, which has different rights or basic human rights or civil rights because of their ethnicity or their nationality. And that is a huge step. That's a huge change. And that happened without, I guess, and I think I'm giving Israelis the benefit of the doubt, without 95% of Israelis know that that happened. I think it's higher than 95%. I think there are very few people who know that happened, but that happened during the war, right? We used the war because we had an opportunity that nobody notices, and we created a huge change, which will be very hard to take back. Um, and I'm talking too much, but I will just say that um, I think that's one of the best examples of the fact that the state of Israel and Israeli policy in the West Bank and in Gaza are more of the same, right? The fact that we're using the war, the fact that nobody's watching, that we have in Israel tens of thousands of people who are evicted from their homes. We have 109 Israeli citizens who are still in captive. We have hundreds of soldiers who died in the past few months. We have people who are in reserve duty for months and their businesses are crashing and their personal life are crashing. And the Israeli government are annexing the West Bank and giving more and more money out of the budget of the government to Orit Struk's office, which will go to outposts. And that money should go to rehabilitating this place and the people to end the war. But that's not the Israeli government's agenda.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's really, it's illuminating. And while it is sort of, I think like you described, right, this like sort of very bureaucratic backroom, a small article on the back pages of the newspaper kind of development, the consequences in terms of both international law, but also just the day-to-day lives of people living in Gaza, in the West Bank, or within Israel's recognized borders, is the potential is massive, and deeply concerning. I think if we could move a little bit from the violent bureaucracy to the in-your-face sort of violence that we're seeing on the ground, I wanted to ask a couple of direct questions about settler terror. I think the first one, which I know, is not always clear to those of us outside of Israel, sort of trying to read and understand what's happening on the ground. What happens after these violent attacks that we are seeing, both in Hawara pre-October 7th, in Jeet last week, where someone was killed, a Palestinian man was killed? What, in the aftermath of these attacks, does the response from various communities and initiatives look like? The IDF, the wider Israeli Jewish community, the Palestinian Authorities police, the civilian administration you spoke about, the wider Palestinian communities in the West Bank. What is sort of the impact and the immediate steps after something like this happened or happens?
As we mentioned before, these attacks, they happen and they go to media, but somehow in the common discourse in society, it's very easy to find a way to justify it, right? To say no, it's just a few bad apples, right? No, that's just one movement that may be a little bit more violent, or even some much harsher stuff like, oh no, they are not supposed to be here. And we have seen politicians saying, using this kind of narrative, using this discourse. And the issue that the settler violence, as Amir mentioned before, it's not something that sporadically happens, something that is some bad apple, something that it's the policy, right? The policy is that they have this impunity. It's important to say that under the context of occupation, right? Israeli settlers, Zamir mentioned also before, is the idea of the separation by ethnicity, by nationality, right? They walk around with this bubble of sovereignty, Israeli sovereignty, and the Palestinians are under the military rule, and exists this kind of pseudo debate around who have the authority to act against violent settlers. And it's interesting that during my service, I didn't have any idea what to do. If I see, I mean, technically speaking, like being a soldier, you are the soldier on the ground, you are the authority. You are seeing settlers being violent and attacking Palestinians. What do we do, right? And even though we know that the army has the authority to stop these guys, right? And also the police have the authority to stop these guys. But it happens that the police, they are settlers by themselves, right? Since, as Amir explained, since October 7 and the Gemara, this units made of settlers serving on their settlements, right? So that is the policy. And I feel that the first time I felt in my face that this is the reality and that's the policy we're applying on the territories was once that we deployed to protect an entrance to Joseph's tomb. Joseph's tomb in Shechem, right? It's a very important place for Jewish tradition. And for me, I remember at the time it was very special serving that area because also my parasha and my bar mitzvah was about this region. And for me, it was kind of very symbolic being there. And then suddenly I found myself, okay, now we have action, right? We are entering in Shechem, Palestinian city, that have this Jewish connection from the past. So for me, it was kind of very symbolic, and I was very excited to take part of that and to be in the action. And we are posted pretty close to the refugee camp of Balata, right, which is one of the biggest populational density in the world. Like it's a very, very hard place to be in. And the idea of these entrances to Joseph's tomb that once a month the army they grant permits to settlers to go around there, and is very clear the idea that this idea of presence demonstration, right? Is our place. We can pray here. We're coming here. We don't have nothing to do. Keep your heads down. The army is here to protect us. And we arrived before it happens. In general, it happens in the middle of the night, and we were posted a few hours before. And then settlers started to arrive in buses. The night was something around 1,000 settlers coming to pray. And suddenly, they started to walk in waves in the direction of the tomb. And suddenly, these groups, the group of people, the waves, they start to become younger. And they become very youth, like I would say something around from 14, 15 years old until 20. And they become also very noisy and very provocative. And they start to really, they're very much provoking the Palestinians and try to wake up the village. And me and my friend, we decided, okay, we must speak with them and say to stop. Like, we are here to protect you, right? We are here at the army. I wasn't fully aware of everything that's going on in this context of being part of the army in the context of occupation. And we went to this group of youngsters around 16, 17 years old. And we said, okay, stop with that. You came to pray, right? Take your stuff, stop with the music, stop with your guitars and go there. And suddenly those kids became absolutely aggressive. And they started to scream at us. Right? What you're doing, you came here to protect the Arabs. Who do you think you are? This is it's our city. Who cares about them? And start to curse us. We have a little bit of pushing here and there. But for me, it was very clear that to who I'm serving. right? Who I'm there to protect, and even if that's the price, right? We close full sections of the city. We put inside of the city thousands of settlers to pray, and for me it was a very hard moment and a very hard understanding that okay, these are the guys that I'm serving to. This is the project that I'm being part of, and I absolutely cannot find any logical explanation how that's benefit to Israel and how that's moral or how that's not absolutely abusive to the Palestinian population.
I appreciate you sharing that experience. It's a powerful illustration of exactly the dynamics that we've been speaking about. And I just want to again reflect back. What I'm hearing from both of you is, I think there's a tendency within both the Israeli Jewish community, or even I see it in my own communities and the wider American Jewish community, to look at incidents of settler intimidation, like you're describing, or outright settler violence, even when it's deadly, especially to condemn it and to say this is horrific, but also to see these attacks as really something that's outside or beyond the status quo of the occupation. And many of our partners, including Breaking the Silence, have really been insisting, like you've been saying, no, this is an instrument of the wider project of the occupation, this part of this project of intimidation and violence in the service of land theft and further violent displacement of Palestinians in the West Bank. I want to, before we turn it over to some of the questions we have in the Q&A, ask the two of you one additional question, just sort of turn our attention a little bit to Masafariata and the threats, the harassment, and now the multiple demolitions that we've seen there over this summer. Can you share with the folks in this conversation a little bit more about what's been happening there, maybe some of what Breaking the Silence has been doing as well to bring attention to what's happening, or in solidarity with the residents of the villagers there?
Yeah, definitely. I will say that Safriyata, one of the southest part of the West Bank, an area that we, for years now, we're doing tours to the area, and we have a lot of Palestinian, Israeli, and international activists who work together in order to try and stop as many things as we can. But I will say that Mustafa Yatra, just like any other place in the West Bank, things gotten a lot worse since October 7th. Again, the violent settlers from the area became the soldiers in the area, and they doubled down on the violent actions in the area. And also to connect it to what we've talked about when we talked about Smotrich's changes in civil administration, we see a lot more demolitions in the area because as of now, the people who are in charge of that are Smotrich's people, right? Directly, and not through the IDF anymore, as it was beforehand, which wasn't good, but this is a lot worse. So we do have a lot of violent attacks in Safriyata. A lot of Palestinians are being physically attacked by settlers. We have a lot of harassments of settlers who are trying to steal or hurt sheep and goats and other animals of Palestinians. The vast majority of people who live in Safriyata, the Palestinians, are farmers or herd owners, and they live very simple life, and it's very impactful when you take over the water well or attacking their sheep. And we have witnessed violent attacks. We have witnessed Palestinian communities who left. Zanuta, one of the biggest Palestinian villages, who were expelled since October 7th, about 250 people who left their village because settlers came to the village and told them you have 1 week to live unless we'll come here and kill everybody, which was a very reliable threat. So they left. So we are trying to bring as many people as possible. We are trying to do as much work as possible with the community. And I will say that one of the main things that I've learned during my times in Breaking the Silence, right? I'm a member of Breaking the Silence in the past 11 years, that the thing we need to do isn't trying to create existence between Israelis and Palestinians as of now, which we need to try and build coexistence between Palestinians and Israelis as of now. The next step will be coexistence, definitely. But as of now, we need to work together to resist the occupation. Palestinians needs to lead the resistance in their villages, because I have the privilege to go home at the end of the day and they keep on living there. So we cannot do anything that they disagree on. And we have to use our privileges as much as possible to bring as many people as possible, to use our privileges with our own rights, our own legal defenses that Palestinians don't have. And I will say that, again, to connect it to other questions about sanctions and about the ICJ's decision a few weeks ago, we've seen the Israeli Supreme Court in the past last week, I think, saying that the displacement of Palestinians from Zanuta was illegal and they need to go back, and the IDF needs to protect them in order when they do. And we've seen today about 40 people who actually came back to Zanuta, which is, I don't know, one of the most important things I think happened in the past, I don't know how long now. It's a very small win, very, very small. It doesn't stop everything, but I do think that's important for us to be able to show that coexistence works, right? So I think the vast majority of, I think most of the credit should go to the Palestinian activists on the ground and to Israeli activists who are actually, for the past, I don't know, 2 years, we have Israeli activists who live in villages in Safriyata trying to escort Palestinian sheep to try to have Palestinians graze their lands, to use our privileges to document everything that happens. And also for international activists who are coming to spend time in the Safriyata in order to try and bring a change and public attention to what's happening there. And it is working. Small wins, but they are important, I think, in order to have hope, I think, for a better future. And I think the fact that people came back to Zanuta today after 8 months, I think, that they weren't in their village is one of the most impactful things that could have happened in order to show that things can change. And I don't know who asked, or if it's your question or one of the other questions, is the reality irreversible or is it permanent? And the answer is everything is changeable. Everything, we do have hope to change, right? Everything that's happening in the West Bank is a policy man-made decision. That means it can be undone, and it can be undone, and you can choose to work or to have different policies. It will take time, it will take effort, but it is possible. So I do wish that even though we're talking about very horrifying things, people will leave these conversations hopeful that things can change. And they do.
I really appreciate you framing it that way. And I imagine I'm not the only person on this call who feels that way. Thank you. I think, yes, it's so important to remember this is all constructed and systems that have been constructed at their oldest, right? Within the last 100 years. Some of them are a few decades old. Some of them are a few years or even a few months old. How this is actually a reversible and recreatable system of oppression and occupation, I think, is essential to remember. And I so appreciate this framing of co-resistance as an eventual lead up to coexistence. We've had sort of other partners have come and spoken with partners at our symposium on webinars recently, talked about shared struggle rather than shared society also within Israel. And I think these framings are so essential even to address some of what you're describing, these underlying power dynamics that undergird any sort of joint Palestinian and Israeli resistance project together. We have a few moments left, so I just want to lift up from the chat We've answered actually a number of these questions. I appreciate it already, but so there was a question about the transformation of the culture of the IDF from a more liberal, secular, or I know when I first lived in Israel, heard it described as this like great equalizing melting pot project within Israeli society to a more nationalist religious institution. The question asked if this was irreversible, but even if you could just speak to that dynamic more broadly, is that something you're observing with this kind of settler reservist cycle, or more broadly also in Gaza, the changing nature of the IDF?
Well, there has been, I would say, a few years or even decades that have been talked about this change in the IDF and in the body of the IDF, like who are being part, who are the commanders, right? As in the past, when we learn about Israel and independence, we have this very the socialist figures, the kibbutznik fighter, right, the kibbutznik soldier, and that was the image I would say for decades. And I would say that during my service, I was kind of shocked when I arrived, right? Because I just arrived from Brazil, from the youth movement, and I was 21 years old, 22 when I drafted. So I have this age gap with Israeli guys, and very fast they understood my opinions, my point of view on a lot of stuff. They really like to discuss, and for me it was impressive in a terrible way, in a very bad way, how much the conversation and the narrative, as I mentioned, is completely violent. And for me, it was very sad to see these guys at this age in this situation of being a soldier. And I remember one day that one of the guys we were discussing, because there was something happening in Gaza, and we didn't know if it would be something that we would escalate or not. And one of my friends said, "Well, I really want to go to a war." And I was like, "Okay, we are the soldiers, we are in the army, we are prepared for that, we are training for that, but you don't want that. Like, you really don't understand what it means. I don't understand too. At this point, I didn't understand. I was just in the train, and to see this young boys having this kind of narrative was very very sad to me. And what is interesting is that when I was electing my unit, I chose the Kfir Brigade and arrived the Nachshon Battalion, because what was the conversation around it is that we find a lot of action in this unit, because we are constantly posted in the West Bank. We have a lot of action. We're doing a lot of stuff, and it's a unit that, I don't know if something in purpose, but we have a huge amount of settlers, religious soldiers, and we have inside of the brigade, we have the Netzach Yehuda units, which we heard a lot about also in the last months, and all that, and all the things that they were involved. So I think that this culture of absolutely nationalistic discourse inside the army is absolutely at all places. And I have been recently, in October 7, I've been in reserve duty also. And a few months after that, I was in the West Bank again. And you see that's becoming the discourse of soldiers. Revenge, they don't have anything to talk, don't have anyone to talk to. We don't have any perspective of change. And that's something that we must end with, this idea of zero-sum game, right? As Avir mentioned, said co-resistance for coexistence. The first step is understanding that we cannot keep living in this circle of blood, killing and dying, and something must be done.
Thank you so much. And I think we have time for, I'm sort of pulling from a number of questions that have been both in the chat and in the Q&A, and that I'm also especially excited to ask the two of you as two very thoughtful, seasoned educators, what can those of us outside of Israel and Palestine be doing if we're not able to physically be on the ground in co-resistance efforts? I know that Breaking the Silence has been working with Common Defense, which is a veterans organization, a progressive veterans organization here in the US, to do additional education. You've put out some fantastic reports in English in September and also recently about what's been happening. But we've had folks here on this call from Canada, from the US, from Germany, asking sort of what else can we do to be in solidarity with your work and to be in solidarity also with people in the West Bank, with Palestinians in the West Bank who are enduring these conditions.
I will say that first, I think the first most important thing everybody needs to do, both in the international community and in Israel, is to educate yourself. You need to know about what's happening. And in order to do that, you need to talk to people who are there and to read reports, as you say, and to read testimonies. So I invite everybody to go into our website and read everything we have there, or to follow us on social media, or to talk to us directly, to me or to Luis, or go to our website and to find our emails. We'll be able and we will be willing to go and meet face to face or via Zoom, whoever wants to meet us. But there's a lot of other organizations and people and individuals who are walking in on the ground that in meeting them and reading what they have to say or write is very important. I will say that in order for us to do our job, we need as much support as possible. And that support can be either by inviting us to talk to people or to donate to the organization or to other organizations. Or if any of you know or have been a soldier, you've been a soldier yourself in the IDF, come to talk to us and give us testimonies, because that's the only way for us to keep on talking about what's happening now. I was a soldier and I was a commander 14 years ago, right? Things changed. We need more and more soldiers to come and speak to us about what's happening now. And I think that the most important thing is that I don't know where everybody's from. I guess the vast majority of you are from the United States. As you said, some of you are from Canada. You need to know that your countries are part of it, whether you like it or not, right? And you need to do political work in your countries as well. You need to speak to your elected officials and you need to demand answers. What's their point of view? What do they think needs to happen here? Do they support the two-state, the one-state, the 15-state solution? I don't care, but whatever they support, they need to show you they're acting on it. Because if they don't, they should not get your vote next time, right? And you need to start asking questions. A lot of, as Louis said before, a lot of Jewish communities in the United States, in Canada, are supporting Israeli communities or Israel with money, with support. And you need to start asking questions where that money goes to, right? What does that money use to? I don't know. What do we do with it? Are you supporting in some way or form the settlement project or outposts or I don't know, displacement of Palestinians? I don't know. You need to do political work in your countries as well as educating yourself and keep on talking to us. And I do think that the most important people who needs to understand the reality and change their ways is the Israeli public and the Israeli society. That's why the vast majority of our work is here in Israel. But you have a role to play as well, both on a political level in your countries and by educating, supporting us financially with testimonies, inviting us to talk in more places. I think that was long enough.
I am seeing that we're at time, and I want to be respectful of your time and our participants' time. So with that, I think very invigorating and necessary charge. I just want to thank you both, Luis and Amir, again for being here, and again our best wishes for Refuah Shlema to Tal, who couldn't join us today. And thank you to everybody who's been here as part of this webinar conversation. We hope you enjoyed it. Thank you again to Ron Skolnick, our program consultant here at PPI. For those who missed the opening, I'll briefly share again. While today's program has been free, generous contributions are what enable our organization, Breaking the Silence, all of these NGOs, to continue to deliver this information and these events at no cost. Please visit progressiveisrael.org, check out our upcoming programming, and if you can, make a donation. We're so grateful again for everyone's continued engagement with partners and our mission, and gratitude again to Breaking the Silence. Take care.